This is an overview of the 1980s. I mean, we were all the new kids on the block. No one had ever heard of industry superannuation, and those who had heard of it were primarily not very positive if they came from the superannuation industry. Now, I can give you a very good example of this because it wasn't just fund managers who felt strongly that the industry funds were not the right thing to do, or that compulsory superannuation, which we were working for, was the right thing to do. It included the main industry body, ASFA. Now, to be fair, ASFA at that time primarily was made up of service providers, but in early 1985, the very first meeting of ASFA that was set down to discuss industry funds, the new industry funds, and in particular to discuss the Building Union's superannuation scheme, had one person addressing them, and he was from an international firm of actuaries and superannuation fund managers, and they had a presence, of course, in Australia. And in case you think I'm exaggerating, I'm going to quote from the Financial Review's report at that time on the points that this man made. The first thing he said was, it gives the union movement control of $1 billion in assets. $1 billion is very little in terms of what we have achieved in the last 20 years. He then said that employer contributions would become negotiable. That is, no longer at the discretion of the employer. It sounds like the 19th century. And he said that superannuation would merely be deferred pay. That's just to give a little flavour of what it was like at that time. A lot of us were trying hard to get an acceptance by the industry bodies for what we were doing. And we found actually that it wasn't just the industry funds that thought that the then ASFA was rather unrepresentative. This was also true of the big corporate funds, and it was true of the public sector funds. We decided to hold a conference. We decided this in 1990. I think it was my idea to do it, along with all sorts of other initiatives by other people to try to change attitudes in the community and in the superannuation community. The CEO of the BHP fund suggested that we hold it in Wollongong. Now, we did this because we wanted to make a statement. We didn't want to have a big glitzy conference. We wanted to have a conference where we concentrated on the role of trustees, the directors of the funds. We wanted to concentrate on a learning experience. We wanted to have a good time, but we didn't want to go over the top. Now, I should say that the conference was a great success, and everyone immediately wanted to have a second one. And I think it also had some influence too on where we were at with ASFA, because soon after ASFA began to change to the kind of organisation that it is today. By our second conference, we were already initiating new ideas, and in this case it was Graham Willis from then STA, now Australian Super, who suggested to me that we should form an organisation especially for trustees to educate them. We decided it was a very good idea to do this, and Graham and I were the initial pro tem officers while we got it going, and I'm credited with giving it its name. CMSF has never been just a conference. It's been an agenda setter for a whole year's work, and you think of all the spin-offs from CMSF. I mean, the one that is very dear to my heart is Women in Super, and we've always tried to make the conference look as though there are women as well as men in the superannuation industry, which you don't always see in other places. But we wanted to have an organisation to help women in this industry, and Women in Super itself has become famous for the Mother's Day Classic, and the Mother's Day Classic has raised more than $3 million for breast cancer research. I think actually that the advent of industry superannuation and the work that was done by CMSF and then by Women in Super has given us some really spectacular women working in this industry. Just thinking about initiatives that CMSF was associated with, or is associated with, well, AIST, as we've already said, comes out of CMSF in the first place. We had our study tours, and one in particular led the industry to form ACSI, and that had come after several years really of conferences of CMSF discussing corporate governance, long before most people wanted to even think about it. We made people think about it. Then there was the Unclaimed Super Recovery. That was an initiative that came out of CMSF. And then more recently, there's the Super Cadets now. That was a brilliant idea of David Whiteley's, but it was taken up and supported by the ACTU and the Australian Industry Group, but much of the bringing into being of it occurred because of CMSF and in particular Fiona Reynolds. I've got so many memories because I've been here for the whole ride, but I think that it can all be put under the heading that every conference of CMSF has been focused on trustees and focused on their responsibility to the members, who are the majority of Australians. And that's why we introduced the Communications Awards. And anyone who's been following the Communications Awards knows that we had pretty basic communications at the beginning, but everyone has learnt out of those Communications Awards, and every time the gold award winners are announced, people rush off to the Super Partners stand to collect the copies of the winning entries so they can see how they can improve their own communications. And the thing I like about CMSF is that it's not competitive, it is sharing, and it does keep at the forefront of our collective mind the people whom we are really working for, the ordinary working people of Australia. There's been huge changes in the last 20 years, and I doubt if anyone would have known that we would have grown to the size that we have grown. But we're not only servicing very big organisations, the funds, but there's been a lot of mergers, and actually the pool of directors is smaller now than it was 5 years ago. And it's going to get smaller again because mergers are going to continue. And we felt that it was a good time to look at having an organisation, a new organisation, one that involved both the trustee directors and the trustee staff. And we also wanted to expand education, again, not just for trustee directors, but for trustee staff. And that opportunity came to us because of the IFS merger with Members Equity. And so we decided to put together an organisation that consisted of AIST in as much as that it would continue to concentrate on trustee directors, but one that would also include staff, and one that would have an even greater focus on education than it had before, which can be done through the incorporation into the new organisation of the IFS training unit. In this new situation where we have all of the things from the AIST of the past, the training arm of IFS, and all of the many things that CMSF has done together, will be a very viable organisation with the ability to do much more than any one of those three components did on their own.